The medical bay of the Galactic Concordance Central Hospital hummed with sterile efficiency, its pristine white walls reflecting the soft luminescence of floating diagnostic orbs. Dr. Silvrak of the Arcuel Dominion, a species renowned for their scientific supremacy, hovered over the patient examination terminal, his elongated fingers tapping through layers of holographic data. His iridescent blue skin shimmered under the sterile lighting, the ridges along his elongated cranium twitching in what passed for Arquelian amusement. Before him sat an anomaly, an earthborn human, Captain Elias Carter, grinning like he had just won an intergalactic lottery instead of sitting in the medical bay for what was supposed to be a routine health screening. Silvrak had seen humans before, of course, but this particular specimen was different. His demeanor was far too relaxed, too smug, as if he knew something the doctor did not. And that was impossible. Human physiology is rudimentary at best, Silvrak remarked, his voice a fluid warble that the universal translator smoothed into clipped, aristocratic tones. Carbon-based, water-dependent, absurdly fragile compared to Arquelian cellular lattice structures. It is a wonder your species has achieved anything beyond subsistence. Elias leaned back on the exam table, folding his arms behind his head. Yeah, we get that a lot. But hey, we make do. Silvrak let out a melodic chime of amusement. Indeed. Though it would be enlightening to identify exactly how your species compensates for such primitive biology. He gestured toward the diagnostic drone, which whirred as it hovered closer, scanning Elias with a series of micropulses. The results populated in a matter of seconds, and Silvrak's 4 pupils constricted in confusion. He ran the scan again. Then a third time. Curious. His ridges pulsed with mild agitation. There appears to be an error in the metabolic composition analysis. Elias chuckled. Oh, something unexpected? Silvrak ignored the human's tone, instead gesturing toward the hovering display. Your iron concentration is extraordinarily high, beyond lethal levels for most known species. He tapped a clawed digit on the interface, bringing up a cellular schematic. And yet, you persist. How? Elias smirked. Hemoglobin. We use iron in our blood to transport oxygen. Silvrak blinked all 4 eyes in a slow, deliberate motion. That is absurd. Metal in the bloodstream should be a fatal contaminant. It would oxidize, clot, destabilize cellular integrity. And yet, here I am, Elias interrupted with a grin. Fully functional and pretty damn resilient, all things considered. Silvrak tilted his head. Resilient is not a term I would attribute to a species with no cellular regeneration beyond rudimentary healing. Elias shrugged. We don't need fancy regeneration. We adapt. We endure. Silvrak's ridges fluttered in skepticism, but his scientific curiosity overrode his disdain. Fascinating. I will need to run further tests. Elias raised an eyebrow. Tests? Silvrak activated the medical bay's automated analysis suite. Yes. We must determine if your biology is an anomaly or if all humans function under such bizarre physiological parameters. A thorough metabolic breakdown will suffice. Elias sighed but remained seated. Fine, fine. Knock yourself out, document. The scans continued, each successive result layering new confusion upon Silvrak's analytical mind. Human bone density was disproportionately high relative to their frame, muscle fibers exhibited hyper-efficient energy conversion, and, most bafflingly, their nervous system displayed an adaptability to pain thresholds that should have rendered them incapacitated in mere moments. Silvrak reviewed the data, his amusement shifting into something bordering unease. This should not be possible, he murmured. These readings indicate a creature designed for endurance beyond logical expectations. Elias grinned wider. Welcome to humanity. Silvrak exhaled through his spiracles. I must verify these findings with an external review. If these results are accurate, your species' biology contradicts fundamental medical principles. Elias chuckled. Good luck explaining that to the medical board. Silvrak, however, was already transmitting the data to the Arquelian Central Medical Review. He did not anticipate the sheer magnitude of the response his findings would generate. Within hours, the hospital's upper echelons were involved. Eminent biologists and xenomedical researchers were requesting further samples, and Silvrak found himself at the center of an escalating scientific debate that threatened to upend centuries of established biological doctrine. Elias, for his part, seemed wholly unbothered by the sudden influx of attention. "Told you we were weird," he said as yet another team of researchers arrived to take additional readings. Silvrak exhaled slowly. "You are not merely weird, Captain Carter. You are an enigma." And enigmas, Silvrak knew, had a way of disrupting the natural order of things. The commotion in the medical bay only intensified as more Archelian scientists and physicians arrived, their curiosity piqued by the incomprehensible resilience of the human patient. Silvrak, normally composed and assured in his scientific supremacy, found himself inundated with demands for further testing. The universal translators buzzed with overlapping voices, each inquiry more incredulous than the last. How could an organism sustain such a toxic metal in its circulatory system? Why did human musculature remain so responsive despite inefficiencies in energy conversion? And, most perplexingly, how could a species with such crude biological mechanisms continue to thrive in environments lethal to more advanced species? Elias Carter observed the unfolding chaos with mild amusement. He leaned against the examination table, arms folded, watching as Silvrak desperately attempted to rein in his fellow researchers. "All I'm saying," Elias said, voice thick with amusement, "is that maybe you folks aren't quite as ahead of the curve as you thought." Silvrak whirled on him, his iridescent ridges pulsing with frustration. "Your physiology defies fundamental principles of xenobiology. You should not exist in this state of equilibrium." Elias shrugged. "And yet, here I am. Breathing, talking," and he lifted his arm and flexed, "thriving." Another researcher, an elder Archelian by the name of Dr. Vrixlan, examined the test results for the third time, his usually composed demeanor faltering. "This is beyond theoretical speculation. If these readings are accurate, human biology operates under entirely different principles. Your species, it is not merely resilient. It is aggressively adaptive." Elias smirked. "Told you. We don't just survive. We endure." The murmurs of the gathered scientists grew more agitated. The implications were vast. If humans could not only tolerate but actively thrive in conditions considered fatal to most intelligent life, what else were they capable of? Silvrak, despite his growing exasperation, refused to accept the findings at face value. He activated the hospital's deep analysis protocols. "We require a controlled simulation," he announced. "If human endurance is truly so remarkable, we must establish a more rigorous test." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You're not gonna throw me in a pit with a hungry Skatha beast, are you?" Silvrak's ridges twitched. "No. But we will be subjecting you to various controlled environments to assess the limits of your adaptability." Elias sighed. "Great. Space science torture. Just what I signed up for." The next few hours were a whirlwind of examinations, environmental shifts, and physiological stresses. Elias was subjected to extreme temperature variations, high-gravity simulations, and atmospheres with chemical compositions that would have liquefied an Archelian's internal organs in seconds. Yet, through every test, he persisted. His body adapted, his breathing adjusted, and his vitals, though fluctuating, always returned to stable parameters far faster than the researchers anticipated. The tests that should have crippled him left him winded but functional, and even when exposed to atmospheric pressures well beyond standard limits, he merely gritted his teeth and pushed through. By the time the final phase of testing was complete, the research team was silent. The weight of what they had witnessed hung heavy in the sterile air. Silvrak, for once, was at a loss for words. He reviewed the data again and again, searching for a flaw, an inconsistency. But the numbers did not lie. Elias Carter was a living paradox. He rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck, looking at the stunned scientists with a lopsided grin. "So, what's the verdict? Am I still a scientific impossibility?" Vrixlan spoke first, his tone reverent. "You are an anomaly beyond comprehension. Your species, it does not merely resist its environment. It overcomes it. It is as if human biology was built not just to survive adversity but to conquer it." Silvrak inhaled deeply through his spiracles. This changes everything. Elias patted the nearest examination table and hopped off. Yeah, well. Welcome to the human experience. But as he turned to leave, a sudden alert blared through the medical bay. The terminal screens flickered red with an emergency notification. An unidentified pathogen had been detected. One of unknown origin, already spreading through the hospital at an alarming rate. Silvrak's expression darkened. No known species has immunity to this strain. He trailed off, eyes shifting to Elias. The human frowned. You want me to what? Be your test subject? Silvrak hesitated. If human adaptability is as advanced as these results suggest, then your immune system may hold the key to stopping this before it escalates. Elias exhaled, shaking his head. You guys are really leaning hard on this indestructible human angle, huh? He flexed his fingers and cracked his knuckles. All right then. Let's see what my biology can really do. Elias Carter had been through hell before. Surviving on alien worlds with barely enough oxygen, wrestling against creatures that thought he'd make a fine snack, and outsmarting bureaucrats who seemed to take pleasure in making life difficult. But this was something new. The pathogen was unlike anything encountered before. Silvrak's team had worked at breakneck speed to analyze its properties, only to confirm the worst: the infection spread at a pace that defied conventional containment. The hospital was already reporting its first fatalities. Every known species that had come into contact with it was showing severe, often fatal, symptoms within hours. Every species except one. Elias. He had been exposed. That much was certain. He had touched infected surfaces, breathed the same air as the affected, and yet, nothing. No fever, no cellular degradation, no respiratory failure. The pathogen that had the galaxy's finest minds scrambling to find a cure had barely registered in his system. Silvrak stood before the human, his ridges shifting between skepticism and desperate hope. The data is undeniable. Your immune system is neutralizing the pathogen before it can take hold. This should not be possible. Elias scoffed. Yeah, Doc, you keep saying that. I'm getting used to it. Vrixlan, the elder Archelian scientist, approached the examination table. The implications are staggering. If we can isolate the mechanism in your immune system that resists this disease, we may be able to synthesize a cure. Elias raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, you need more blood samples? He sighed. Fine, take what you need. But let's be real, medical miracles don't happen overnight. Silvrak's expression darkened. Perhaps not. But we do not have the luxury of time. The pathogen has breached containment. It is no longer confined to the hospital. It is now spreading through the sector. Elias' stomach dropped. You mean this thing could wipe out entire planets? Vrixlan nodded grimly. At its current rate, the mortality rate among most species will exceed 90% within days. Entire populations will be lost. Elias ran a hand through his hair. Damn. He took a deep breath and exhaled sharply. All right. What's the plan? Silvrak gestured to a terminal screen, displaying the pathogen's molecular structure alongside Elias' immune response data. We need a controlled exposure test. We must determine precisely how your biology neutralizes the infection at a cellular level. But this is not without risk. We will need to deliberately introduce a higher concentration of the pathogen into your system to observe its reaction. Elias let out a low whistle. So you want to infect me on purpose? Sounds like a party. Vrixlan interjected. We will monitor every variable. We believe your immune system will eliminate it, but if there is any deviation, we must act quickly. Elias shook his head, smiling wryly. You guys sure know how to make a guy feel special. Despite the levity, the weight of what was at stake pressed down on him. He had always been proud of humanity's ability to push through the impossible, but this was something else entirely. If his body held the key to saving billions of lives, he had no choice but to step up. The procedure began within the hour. A reinforced containment chamber was prepared, its sterile interior filled with monitoring equipment and medical drones. Elias sat on the examination table, rolling up his sleeve as Silvrak prepared the pathogen sample. Once we introduce the concentrated strain, we will monitor for any anomalies, Silvrak explained. If your immune system responds as expected, we may be able to synthesize an antibody in time. Elias nodded. Got it. Let's get this over with. The moment the pathogen was introduced into his system, the effects were immediate, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of experiencing any symptoms, Elias felt an odd surge of energy, as though his entire body had shifted into overdrive. His vitals spiked briefly but stabilized within seconds. The monitoring equipment began blaring warnings, but not from any sign of distress. His body was obliterating the pathogen at an accelerated rate. Silvrak's eyes widened as he analyzed the live readings. Incredible. Your immune response is adapting in real time, targeting and dismantling the infection before it can replicate. It is not simply resisting, it is learning. Vrixlan stepped closer to the monitor. This level of biological efficiency is unprecedented. If we can harness this. A sudden tremor rocked the facility, followed by blaring emergency sirens. Silvrak turned sharply. What now? A security officer's voice crackled through the intercom. We have an unauthorized breach in the quarantine wing. Several infected patients are attempting to escape. We are unable to contain them. Elias clenched his fists. Great. Because this situation wasn't bad enough already. Silvrak's ridges bristled. If the infected escape, they will accelerate the spread across the sector. We must stop them. Elias hopped off the examination table. Then let's go stop them. Vrixlan hesitated. You are still being monitored. Elias rolled his shoulders. Doc, if I can handle a galaxy-killing plague, I think I can handle a few panicked patients. Silvrak exhaled sharply, clearly displeased but recognizing the urgency of the moment. Then we have no choice. We must act now. The three of them moved quickly, making their way toward the containment wing. The sight that greeted them was grim. Several heavily infected beings, their bodies ravaged by the disease, were in the process of breaking through the decontamination barriers. Elias had no weapons, no fancy tech to rely on. Just his instincts and the sheer stubborn resilience of humanity. All right, folks, he muttered, cracking his knuckles. Let's show 'em what a human immune system can really do. The containment wing was in chaos. Alarm klaxons blared through the corridors, flickering emergency lights casting erratic shadows as security personnel scrambled to restrain the infected. Some patients, overcome by panic and pain, had already broken free, their bodies racked with violent spasms. The pathogen was ravaging their systems, reducing them to desperate creatures fighting for survival. Elias Carter wasted no time. His body was still surging with the strange energy brought on by his immune system's accelerated response, and though he had no weapons, he didn't need them. He surged forward, tackling the closest infected patient before they could breach another security door. His sheer physical strength, enhanced by his body's extreme adaptability, allowed him to hold them down without injuring them further. Silvrak and Vrixlan worked in tandem, deploying a rapidly synthesized sedative to keep the infected restrained. The research team, previously paralyzed by the unfolding disaster, now moved with renewed purpose. They saw what Elias was doing and realized the implications. If he could withstand the pathogen, perhaps his very presence could stabilize the infected long enough for treatment. One by one, the infected were subdued. Those on the verge of collapse clung to Elias, their breathing labored but slowing as their immune systems seemed to react, perhaps instinctively, to his presence. The initial theory had been correct. Human biology didn't just endure, it adapted and influenced its surroundings. Silvrak wasted no time. We need to synthesize a biological compound using Carter's immune response, he commanded. If we can replicate his resistance, we may have an antidote. Vrixlan nodded. We must work fast. We do not have much time. The next hours were a blur of scientific breakthroughs and desperate trials. Silvrak and his team worked tirelessly, analyzing Elias' immune data, isolating the precise factors that allowed his body to counteract the infection. Meanwhile, Elias himself, still pushing his limits, stayed by the side of the infected, lending whatever support he could. Then, finally, a breakthrough. Silvrak stood before the gathered team, exhaustion evident but his ridges pulsing in triumph. We have it. A synthesized serum modeled after Carter's adaptive immune response. If it works, it will neutralize the pathogen and restore balance to those already infected. Elias gave a tired but triumphant grin. Then what are we waiting for? Let's get it into circulation. The antidote was administered. Slowly at first, to the worst cases, and then more broadly as their conditions began to stabilize. The results were undeniable. The infected, once on the brink of death, showed marked improvement within hours. What had been a hopeless situation was now turning into an unprecedented victory for galactic medicine. The crisis had been averted. The pathogen had been neutralized. And, for the first time in centuries, the scientific community found itself re-evaluating its assumptions about what constituted superior biology. As the hospital returned to normal operations, Silvrak found himself standing beside Elias, staring out of the observation deck at the stars beyond. You have rewritten our understanding of resilience, Silvrak admitted. Your species is not simply surviving. It is shaping the very nature of survival itself. Elias chuckled, stretching his arms. That's just what we do, document. We push through. No matter the odds. Vrixlund joined them, his usual composed demeanor tinged with admiration. This will change everything. Your biology is not merely an anomaly, it is a lesson. Adaptation, persistence, resilience. These are the true markers of strength. Elias nodded. Yeah. And maybe next time, the galaxy won't be so quick to laugh at human biology. Silvrak inclined his head. Indeed. As Elias prepared to depart, the weight of everything that had happened settled over him. He had come in for a routine checkup. Now, he had helped save an entire sector. And though the galaxy was vast and filled with dangers, he knew one truth would always remain. Humanity didn't just survive. It endured. And that made all the difference.